Hi, I wanted to come on this morning just to make a short video. Um, it's really early, but I was in the bed. I got up and I was in the bed actually. I woke up and I was in the bed thinking about a couple of things that happened to me yesterday, and they were like really teaching moments for me. And I thought, well, why not come and just share? So I don't have, it's not really a journal entry per se, or I don't have any notes or anything like that. But I just thought I would share what I learned yesterday from my day. So yesterday morning, I was on my way to a store, and as I was driving, I could see a car that was directly on my right side, and they were sort of pacing with me. And it was just me and this other car really on the road. Maybe one other car next to me, but it was really no traffic. But as I was approaching the light to turn to make my left turn, the car sort of darted right in front of me, and the light was yellow, so they could have went through and made the turn, but they stopped right there, so then I couldn't make my turn. And I said, what the F are you doing? But I didn't, like, I actually said the whole curse word, right? So when I said that, I sort of immediately, I said to myself, Nina, you don't even curse anymore. So why did you just say that? And I had to sit there with myself and say that. But as I'm sitting at the red light and just sort of talking myself through this moment here, and I said, well, and I had to start really sort of calming myself down a little bit because I was irritated that they did that. And I said, well, hey, you don't even curse anymore. So why are you even doing that? And then the second thing is I had to start thinking about like and reasoning with myself in the moment and just, well, maybe they're trying to get somewhere in a rush, or maybe, all these things, right? Just to try to walk myself through my own emotions here. And the light changed green, and so the car still in front of me, but I had about a 5 minute drive to get from where I was to where I had to get. And I said, well, even if they're not in a rush, and clearly they probably were not, because they could have turned and made the light. But so I said to myself, well, what am I learning here in this moment? And I said, why did I allow someone to dictate my response to a behavior, to a situation? Why did I allow that? And the lesson I learned, the first one was, is just don't allow someone else to hijack your emotions. Don't do it. Because immediately after I said the curse word, I said to myself, I don't even curse anymore. And it was great benefit for me to like walk myself through that moment, because immediately when I acknowledged the bad way I responded, I brought it to the surface, and it was me sort of acknowledging that I had done something that was not great, but it was just full on me saying to myself, okay, you don't even respond like this anymore. This is not who you are anymore. So, and sort of became unidentified with that, because, and that was a great moment for me, because in Brene Brown, she talks about this. She calls it the Gremlins, because it's like a movie from like back in the day, but they were like these creatures that they couldn't survive once they had light on them. Once they were exposed to the light, they couldn't survive. And so she calls like our behaviors and our toxic thoughts and things like that the gremlins. And that's exactly like what I thought about too in that moment, is because as I had thought about the way I had just responded, I brought it to the surface by talking myself through it. I brought it to the surface, and then I coupled it with, okay, I no longer respond this way. That's not who I am anymore. So I acknowledge it, but then now it's like, now that I brought it to the surface, I can then say, okay, next time you respond differently, because this is not who you are. You don't respond like this anymore. And so the thing was is that, yes, I made a poor choice, but now I acknowledged it. And so now if I felt any sort of shame or any of that behind that bad feeling, it can't stay, because I've acknowledged it and I understand that I no longer identify with it. So it was brought to the surface. So that's, it was like during this 5 minute drive here, and it was like, okay, the second thought I had was, it's like, why did I allow to, well, it was just to never allow someone to hijack your emotions, or something. And it really is someone, though, because we as people, we create situations, we create environments. So it's like, for example, if your house is messy, it is because of you. You created that environment by either habitually not cleaning up behind yourself, for one day or a collection of days. But is that we create the environment. So if a workplace is chaotic, it's because the people in the workplace have made it chaotic with their systems and with their behaviors and whatever. But the behaviors come from a thought. So if something is chaotic, if something is messy, if the environment reflects that, it's a reflection of the people, of the person in that environment. So it's like, don't let someone hijack your emotions. And I thought about that a little more too, because I said to myself, as I was driving, I said, Nina, you're working on your prefrontal cortex. You're working on your prefrontal cortex. You know, all of these experiences are opportunity to sharpen your prefrontal cortex. And I said that to myself because as I'm learning more about the brain and our body and just emotional intelligence and things like that, as I'm discovering more about the brain and all of that, our prefrontal cortex, this front part of our brain here, like our forehead, behind our forehead here, is like our will. It's like our impulse control, our emotional response to things, um, our decision making, how we prioritize and coordinate and order our steps in terms of, if I do A, then B will happen. And so it also allows you to decipher between cause and effect. And those things are key with our habits, our addictions, and just behaviors. It's so important. It's our judgment here in terms of our will and how we move through day-to-day life. And so it's so important. And I said to myself, well, if I allow someone to hijack my emotions, I'm essentially allowing that person to control my mind. And who wants to live like that? These were just my thoughts as I was driving during this little 5 minute bit here after this traffic incident here. And so, yeah, and it's like, if you allow someone to control your emotions and then essentially control your mind, you are essentially like a puppet on the string, and everything will move you. And just being transparent, in my 20s, oh my goodness, I used to be like the kind of person that if I had an argument or something was going on in my personal life at home and I had to go to work, I would go to work with an attitude and have an attitude with everybody, about everything, and have a bad day. It was already decided from the time I left the house, and when I walked into my workplace, that I was already going to have a bad day. That's what I did. And then the same was true if I had something was going on at work and I had a bad day at work. Instead of me trying to figure out and problem solve and make it better, I would bring that bad attitude and those feelings home to my personal life. And so one thing leaked into the next thing, and I wasn't able to compartmentalize and really try to resolve. And it was just a big problem. I wasn't able to manage my emotions and or any of that. And so it's no way to really function. It's really draining, actually. Um, yeah, but that's how I used to behave. And so yeah, don't let someone hijack your emotions. And if you feel like it's a situation that's happening that like triggers you, just know that it's actually people. Because again, we create environments. They don't just create themselves, we do it. So, but it all comes from a thought. It all comes from thought. So, yeah, but I just said to myself, as I was driving, I'm working on my prefrontal cortex. I'm working on my prefrontal cortex. So every time you encounter like a problem, a perceived problem, or, and the other thing I don't want to get off track, but the other lesson I had learned too was that had sort of calmed me down actually was I thought to myself, okay, well, Nina, how many times have you cut in front of somebody in traffic? I've done that 10, 20, 30 times over during my whole driving experiences here. So I had to really check myself and say, okay, well, this person is doing something perceived wrong to you, a trespass against you. But how many times have you done that? And so it really allowed me to just be able to step back and really observe the way I reacted and how I was feeling and just really get myself in check. Because I said to myself, a lot of times when somebody does something wrong to us, we forget all the wrong we've done. We tend to forget that in the moment. And instead of us like extending grace and kindness to another person, we react as if it's the end of the world, and that it's like we're upset, and we forget that we've probably done the same thing at some point in our lives, so, or something similar. So it was about just understanding, like, if you encounter a situation, um it's like before you respond, just think. One of the things that's probably helpful is to think like, okay, have I done this before? Before I respond, just, have I done this before? Is this something that I've done to somebody else before? Or think about even how you might want to respond, but then take a minute or a beat to just think, okay, well, let me not respond like that. Do the opposite. That might help too, because I notice now that if I make a poor decision in how I respond to something, I feel bad afterwards. Like almost immediately too, I feel bad afterwards. And that whole feeling bad and having to wrestle with that, it sort of can cause a bit of shame, or maybe even a lot of shame. And that's the whole thing of like what Brene's Brown work, a part of her work, talks about. Once you bring shame to the light, it can't stay. It won't survive it. And you bring the shame to the light, but then you combine it with empathy and a grace. And once you meet it with that, it won't survive it. And so that's the whole point too, of like acknowledging things too. So yeah, that was my first experience, right? Later on in the day, I went to Starbucks, right? I went to Starbucks. So I went in Starbucks, and there were about 3 people working. There was like one lady at the drive-through, and 2 other guys on the line there. And they looked at me when I came in, and I was the only person in the store. But I could tell they were really, really busy. They were slammed, right? So I stood there for about 10 minutes, probably even a little bit more than that, actually. And I'm not exaggerating. I stood there quite a bit. And they didn't look up at me any other time. They just totally ignored me. They didn't say, how can I help you? Or they just ignored me, right? And instead of me responding, the way my old self would have responded, I probably would have been very, very much in attitude and just raised my voice even and demanded attention, sort of like a child might do when they have a tantrum to get attention and they fall out and scream. I just stood there silently and I waited to see, like, okay, at what point are they gonna ask to help me? But then when I realized that they probably were not and I was gonna continue just to waste time standing there, I wasn't even really mad or anything. And I just said, well, do I need to go to the drive through in order to get my pickup order? Um, and they were like, no, 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 no. You know, you can pick up your order here. But it was like, it wasn't until I spoke up that they then came to help. And I could actually, from the time I walked in, I could see my drink sitting there. And I said, I believe that's my drink right there. And so once she started to bag up the drink, the other guy said, no, no, I can do it. Until they, and then she was like, no, I got it. But it was like, it wasn't until I spoke up that they then acknowledged. But it was like, on my way out the door, I said, thank you so much. I understand you guys are busy. Have a great day. And I got in the car. A couple of revelations I had gotten from that. It was because the first one was when I came into the store, when I walked into the store, I was like a walking problem to them. They didn't need one more customer to serve. They didn't need one more person they have to deal with. They were already slammed, right? So I was like a walking problem to them. And they totally ignored me during my whole time. They just ignored me, right? And it wasn't until I actually spoke up that they wanted to help. So it's like one revelation I sort of had gotten from that was that sometimes a problem will only be quiet for so long until it becomes so massive and loud that you have to face it. And I thought about that because I said I was their walking problem. But it wasn't until I actually spoke and became so I was invisible to them, but it wasn't until I became visible that they had to face me, right? And I thought about it in terms of like that because I had a couple of days ago I did a Bible study just to myself with myself in the morning, and I was reading through David and Goliath, and I thought about how David ran up. It said he ran up to meet Goliath, and he it was just, and then he ran up to meet Goliath. And then he had 5 stones, but he only grabbed one. He only needed the one. And when he threw it at Goliath, he hit his head, specifically his forehead. And it said the stone sank into his forehead, and then Goliath fell. And then he took Goliath's sword and cut off his head. So I thought to myself, it's all about getting control of your mind. And David was able to defeat Goliath because he was able to take him down in his, through his mind. And I thought to myself, that's exactly like what happens in our day to day. Things are able to take us down because they can get control of our mind and hijack our mind. And from the time we wake up into the time we go back to bed, there are so many things pulling at us and trying to come into our temple here to affect the way we feel, which will then affect our thoughts, and then it will kind of reflect on our behaviors. There's so many things that pulls at us. And if you allow all these outside things to control your mind, then which is your will, then your will have a hard time and almost impossible to align with God's will. Because in the Lord's Prayer, it says, your kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So it's about God's will and your will aligning. But if, and Barbara O'Neill, she talks about, I won't get off track too much, but all these things I've learned. So it's like Barbara O'Neill, she talks about how she makes a lot of connections between like the brain and the Bible and the body and things like that. And she says in our prefrontal cortex, our frontal lobe here is where God communicates with man. And that makes sense to me now, because if our will and our judgment and our decision making and how we order steps and our impulses and behavior and control is housed here, then if we don't intentionally try to block out the distractions and things that try to come into our temple to affect the way we think, then our will won't really align ever with his. And so it's about not losing your head. You see, David was able to defeat Goliath because he hit him right in the head, the forehead. And it said the stone sank into his forehead. He was able to take him down, and then he cut off his head, so he made sure he took off the head. So it's like, don't lose your head. Don't lose your head. That was like my thought as I was like getting in the car after these experiences. Like, don't lose your head. And that's the whole thing. It's like, because once you allow someone or something outside of yourself to control you, it's like you don't have control over your mind anymore. And that's really not a good space to be in. It's not a good space to be in. And a lot of the things that's happening, like, especially like with social media and what's going on in the world, is because people are so easily influenced. And it's like, and it's all in an attempt to get control of your mind, which then will control your behaviors and how you show up in the world. So don't lose your head. And sometimes when you encounter something that's difficult, or a perceived problem, or somebody who's trespassing against you, and even with the Lord's Prayer, it says, forgive us for our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So it's like, if you have a moment that is a frustration for you, or something is being done to you that you perceive to be a wrong, try to pause and step into the moment of what's going on. Because here's the thing, like, I used to, at the Starbucks, I stood there patiently. And I think part of the reason why I didn't get like over the top too and irritated was because I used to actually manage Subway restaurants. And I can remember I used to work by myself some days and I used to be so busy, and I could have so many things to do, like behind the scenes, schedules and inventory, all these things, right, behind the scenes to do. And I used to be, that didn't involve serving a customer right there in that moment. But the thing is that all the things I had to do behind the scenes were to serve the customer and keep the restaurant going. So it's like, in that Starbucks moment, I was able to sort of step into what they were going through, and to say to myself, okay, I know what this feels like to be overwhelmed at work. I know what this feels like to not want to have to deal with one more customer. I know what this feels like. So no need to get agitated or irritated. Just wait patiently. Now, waiting patiently, it has its sort of limits there. It has its limits. It has to be a healthy boundary there. But I was able to understand what they were going through. So that's the other thing too, is like, if somebody's doing something that you don't like or whatever, try to see like, okay, have I done this before? Do I understand what this feels like? And oftentimes you can say, yeah, I've done this probably 10 or 30 times over. I've done this same thing or something similar. Or I understand what this feels like because I've experienced something similar. And that'll kind of take you down from your heightened emotion and wanting to respond in a unhealthy, not so great way to a more reasonable and to get a more desired outcome. So that's another thing I had learned too, and it's that with the whole Bible study, David was able to take Goliath down, and because I thought it was significant that he threw the stone at his head, and the stone sank into his forehead. So it's about working on your prefrontal cortex, the mind, in terms of understanding that that's where your will is housed, your impulses and your behaviors, and how you manage your emotions, how you order your steps in terms of prioritizing things. Um, if I don't do A, then B won't happen. Cause and effect. And so again, if you take a pause to really understand that, and that every challenge is an opportunity for you to kind of sharpen your mind. And this is headquarters for you. It's headquarters. So don't allow somebody to control your mind. It's not a good way to live. So yeah, just a couple of my sharing experiences. Just I wanted to share my experiences from yesterday. So it's like, try to meet a difficulty or something that's going on with empathy, and try to step into the moment and look at it from a different perspective. Um, and then it's helpful too, because if you respond in a negative way, don't stay stuck in shame. Acknowledge it, and then unidentify with it and say, I no longer respond like this. I no longer behave like this. And if you want to apologize for it and say, okay, I'm sorry for doing this, next time I'm going to do A, B, and C. If you want to do that, that's fine. But it's about acknowledging it so you can bring it to the surface, because it's like that gremlin. It can't survive empathy or grace in the light. It can't survive that. So that negative, couple it with the positive thing. And yeah, don't allow someone else to hijack your emotions. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Get control of your mind, and and understand that you can be different. Every day you get a chance to wake up, you can be different. So in the process of deciding to become different, don't allow the things that still happen to try to take you back to an old version of yourself. Choose to make a choice that aligns with the new person you're becoming. And you can. You don't have to do something the same way that was shown to you as a child. You don't have to respond the same way. You don't have to have the same addictions. You don't have to have the same toxic behaviors. You don't have to do that. You can be your own person, control your own mind, and get in alignment with God, His will and your will. Get in alignment with Him. And that is the sweet spot. And it takes some practice to get there, but in every day, it's a conscious, intentional choice to decide that too. In every encounter you have with someone, every situation, it's a choice to do that. And so it takes some work, but it's really worth it. So, and another thing too, I'll add really quickly, is that every time you make a better choice and a good, positive choice, you feel really good about yourself. And I noticed that too, like the traffic light situation. I said a curse word and I felt bad after, and I talked myself through it and I felt better. The Starbucks situation, I dealt with it completely differently, and I felt so good about myself after I had talked through the lessons and things I was learning. I felt really, really good about myself. And every time you make a positive, respond in a positive way and make a better choice about something, it adds to your self-esteem bucket. It adds to your estimation of self-value. And the shame and the negative feelings you have about yourself or whatever, those things will become smaller and smaller and smaller. And so that's the whole thing. It's like you'll every time you make a better choice, you'll feel better about yourself, and that will increase the value of self. Um, and I just, and something that I heard Jim Rohn say. He said a part of emotional intelligence is learning what to properly aim your emotions at. And so that's the thing too. It's like every day, just make a conscious choice. No matter what you encounter, just understand that, okay, I have an opportunity to respond differently. I don't have to respond the same. Um, yeah, and not acknowledge too, like, what's your giant, because again, um, if you don't acknowledge your giant, then you can't conquer it. And so for me, for example, my giant was like anger and fear. For a majority of my life, I made decisions out of anger and fear. And um, if you let that go on for so long, you'll get to a point where you don't recognize yourself. Um, and it creates your environment around you as well. And that's really a tough thing to have to wrestle with at a certain point. So just begin to acknowledge your giants, whatever your giant may look like. And it's different for everybody. But if you don't acknowledge it and sort of ignore and make it invisible, eventually that giant will become so large and loud that you cannot ignore it. And it'll probably be a bigger thing to have to face somewhere down the line. So, yeah, I just thought I would share that. Just some things I learned yesterday from my couple of experiences here, and I just thought I would share. So, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you on the next video.